Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to welcome you to our third session of Journey to Health. And we're going to begin now. Bonnie will be making a very delicious dish, in my opinion. I have tried it a number of times because she has made it, and I really enjoy it. So I will let her tell you about it.
Well, good afternoon. We are glad that you're with us again. And I was thinking about restaurants. You remember the last time you were at a restaurant? Well, sometimes when we remember when we were at a restaurant, we would pay extra to get sweet potato fries. So I thought today we would make sweet potato fries, which are really quite easy and they're quite healthy. Sweet potatoes, of course, are so much more healthy than regular potatoes. Not that regular potatoes aren't, but I'll start here with I already have sweet potatoes that I've already cut up. So we have the part of a sweet potato here, and we just take this wonderful knife, the chef's knife, because it is so much better than any other knife I've ever used. And we cut the potato. I cut the potato in half. Then it makes quite big wedges. So I will make them a little bit smaller. And the recipe, by the way, you can still get the recipes at the same place. Go to our website, damascusgrace.org. Click on the Ministries tab and pull down Journey to Health, and you'll see the recipes. All of the recipes are listed there. This is the sweet potato fries. So here I'll put these in there. And then I'll chop up the rest here. And here are the rest. So I have all the fries, the sweet potatoes in the bowl. And all we do is, you can see them all in there. We add olive oil. Now the directions say chop up 5 sweet potatoes, but there's only 2 of us. So 2 works quite well. And it calls for a tablespoon and a half of oil. We use olive oil. I just put in a tablespoon of oil. So I'll put it on top here. And then it calls for 2 to 2.5 teaspoons of salt, a half a teaspoon of paprika, a fourth of a teaspoon of onion powder, and a fourth of a teaspoon of garlic powder. Well, because I'm using less potatoes, I use less salt. So I only used a half a teaspoon of salt. For everything else, the paprika, the onion powder, and the garlic powder, we found that having the same amount as for 5 potatoes as for 2 really didn't make a difference. The salt did. The salt gets too salty, of course, you'd think that. So then you do this with your hands. You mix it up with your hands. So I'm going to put on these trusty gloves. So I mix it up pretty good. And then I'll put it on the tray and you space it out so it is not, let's see, there you have it, good. So then I will space out after I finish mixing it really good. I already have my oven at 350, and then you bake it for about 20 minutes. Of course, it probably depends on how thick you cut your sweet potatoes. Mine are pretty chunky. We sort of like them that way. And also, I assume I know you could peel them, but I know when I get sweet potato fries or steak fries, I sort of like having the skin on. So we leave the skin on. Some will not have them. So then all I do is, I'll move this closer so you can see. All I do here is put them on the tray. I have them on a baking tray, and I put them, so let me do that here so you can see. So you can see how I line them up so they have a little bit of breathing space, so they will bake and not be on each other. And this is a great way to do it because, of course, frying is not the best for you, but these taste just as good as the fried ones. So I'll put them on here, and I'll have John now, he'll demo the next thing, which you will also find at the same place, the cherry chocolate pudding.
Okay, so my job is to make cherry chocolate pudding, and I have instructions here as to how to do that. And actually, it's quite simple. Bonnie has prepared all the ingredients for me, so I just have to get them all into the blender. And it begins with half of a Hass avocado, which should be ripe, and we will drop that in a quarter at a time. And that's the first thing. Second thing is 1.5 cups of dark, sweet, frozen cherries, pitted of course, and those will all go in. Not too hard to do that. Of course, it does take some work to get it all ready. 3 tablespoons of unsweetened cacao powder, and that's right here in a little container. So in that goes. And then 2 tablespoons of almond butter, and that's a little tricky because that is in a container, but it doesn't want to come out. So we'll see if we can get it out. And we're making progress here. And so I'm just going to reach down as far as I can and try to get it off the spatula. And we'll call that good. Alright, the next ingredient is a 1/2 cup of pitted dates. We have nice dates here, the jewel dates. Those have been pitted by Bonnie. And then a pear, which has been cored and stemmed, and we have a nice pear here. It's a D'Anjou pear, and in goes the pear. And finally, we have a bit of coconut milk, it looks to me like. Is that correct?
Almond.
Or it's almond milk. Okay, it's 3/4 of a cup of almond milk. And that's going to make everything work better because it'll provide some liquid when we do our mixing. Now, there are a couple of alternative agreements, optional. You could put in a banana. Bonnie's not a fan of bananas, so there's no banana going into this. Also, 1/4 of a cup of chia seeds is optional. We tried that. You put those in after you do the mixing. Really didn't like the texture when we did that, so we don't do that. But if you're in love with chia seeds, you could do that. And now we just have to get the lid on this device, and it's ready to mix. And we will put it on here and start the mixing.
And go. Let's take the thing and beat it down on the sides. So
Okay.
let's use them. Okay. Okay. It's a little noisy. I tried to mute it before. Maybe I didn't mute it at the right time. Um, it just takes a few minutes to beat it up. I will do that now. Has a nice odor to it, I can tell you that. Okay, I think I'm on now. Now that should be it. Now we tried this, the original recipe called for berries, and we tried berries, but they made it taste bitter. So it was a lot of trial and error till we found things that tasted good and were healthy. So I'll just have our pudding here. Let's have some berries and a little bit of sprinkle here and I will move it closer so you can see what it looks like. Unfortunately, you can't taste it, but we can. So anyway, this is what we're doing for today. It's very easy. It's nice sort of comfort food for a day like today. And I'd like to find out at the end if anybody has perchance tried any of the other recipes. Okay, because of advanced age, I guess, I forgot to show you the plated food. So this is what the sweet potato fries look like, and that's about half of them with a salad and a vegetable. This is a meal. It's a pretty hearty meal for us. It's quite filling. And here we have the pudding. So you can see. Anyway, this concludes the cooking part for today.
Okay, now we're going to talk about living naturally. First thing we want to do is talk about water. Water, of course, is very important. Most of your body is water. And drinking 5 or more glasses of water a day actually is quite important. In fact, a study was done on 20,000 Adventists, and they discovered that those who drank 5 or more glasses of water a day had a mortality at half the rate of those who drank 2 glasses or fewer a day. So it's very important to get water, and I think 5 glasses is not an unreasonable amount, though you may want to drink more. Also, in the same study, it was observed that a high intake of sugar-sweetened beverages increased mortality risk for men by 46% and by 147% in women. And I don't know that I can tell you exactly why the big difference between the two, but it's quite clear you don't really want to spend a lot of time drinking sugar-sweetened beverages because it really does have a consequence. And people have at times lost considerable weight just by dropping out sugar-sweetened beverages from their diet. Some known consequences of dehydration are more urinary tract infections, more kidney stones, more constipation, and more colon cancer. Of course, the first 3 of those are not likely to kill you. Colon cancer certainly does kill people, and it's not likely that the colon cancer really explains the bulk of those excess deaths from not drinking enough water, but it is something that's been proven. We actually think that the increased the markedly increased death rate from drinking only 2 glasses of water or less a day has to do with increased blood clotting, which leads to more heart attacks and more strokes. So it's very important to get enough water. And actually, you want to get enough water that your urine is light colored, and maybe no color at all if you're a real advocate for drinking a lot of water. My own approach is to, when I first get up in the morning, I go downstairs and I put about 3.5 glasses or 8-ounce glasses of water into a very large glass plus a smaller glass, and I heat that in the microwave oven to about 117 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't want it to be so hot to burn me, but I like to drink it warm on a cold morning especially, but even on a warm morning I drink it hot. And the reason for that is it acts like a laxative if you drink it warm. And if I drink that much water, then I'm more likely to get the amount of water I ought to get during a day. I find myself, forgetting to drink. And then I try to drink a couple more glasses before lunch. And if I do that, then I've pretty well got my need for water filled, and I try not to drink near bedtime because I don't really want to get up 5 times at night. I already get up enough times at night. And of course, avoid those sugar-sweetened beverages. Now, let's talk a little about sunlight. Sunlight is actually mood therapy if you want. Research has shown that bright light therapy is quite effective for people with serious depression and people with bipolar disorder. For both of those things, it is quite helpful. And if you get up and see the bright sunlight in the morning, that's good therapy. And of course, you really have to get outside to really get a good dose of that. So a morning walk is an excellent thing to do. And that's much easier to do, of course, in the summer, and helpful more on a sunny day than on a cloudy day. But even a morning walk on a cloudy day is good for you. And so I highly recommend it. Of course, getting sunshine is helpful in other ways, and one of those ways is early morning sunshine helps your circadian rhythms. It keeps them in step with the dark time when you ought to be sleeping. You will feel sleepy earlier in the evening when it's actually better to go to bed and get good sleep. And you will sleep better. You'll have more energy if you sleep better. And we also have reason to think that sunshine helps your immune system. And people have thought that it helps it because it provides more vitamin D, but that's been hard to prove. But we do know that people who live far from the equator have more problems with autoimmune diseases such as multiple sclerosis and lupus and that sort of thing. So that has led to the thinking that somehow sunshine helps with our immune system. And there are other reasons for thinking that as well, which I won't go into. Sunlight, of course, does help produce vitamin D in your body, and for many centuries, that was basically how people got their vitamin D. We didn't realize that there was that problem of not getting enough vitamin D would cause rickets and bone deformities and all kinds of problems. Though people suffered from those problems, they just didn't know what the cause was. But if you get up to 15 minutes of sun exposure, it is not a risk to your health. It's not going to cause skin cancer. If you're dark skinned, you can get twice that much sun because you will need to get more sun in order to get the vitamin D benefit. And it definitely promotes healthy bones. And it might not be all you need, and your doctor can help you with that, but you can certainly help yourself. And I don't take vitamin D, and for most of my life I've never taken vitamin D. Of course, it is put in certain foods that we get, and that helps. But Bonnie has started taking vitamin D, and so to please her, I take it once a week. I don't guess that's a whole lot, but it keeps her happy and it keeps me happy. Let's now talk about exercise. Exercise is necessary for health. You cannot be healthy without exercise. And there are many benefits, and you've probably heard many of these benefits. It helps with major diseases like heart disease and strokes and diabetes. It definitely improves your chances of not getting cancer. It is good for your mental health. And in fact, it has been shown that people who exercise regularly have the benefit of lower risk of depression. And in people who are depressed, it has proven about as effective as taking medication. So if you seriously exercise, you can benefit your mental health. It provides healthier bones because your bones really respond to weight on the bones. That keeps them healthy and growing in the right ways. Not necessarily bigger at your age if you're an adult, but it keeps remodeling the bones to fit the stresses that you place on the bones, and that keeps them healthy. It also provides improved sleep, and you will certainly be stronger and have less risk of falling. And we also know that there is some benefit to the immune system from exercise. People who regularly exercise at a moderate level have fewer colds than sedentary people. Now, for marathoners, the reverse seems to be true, though we do not see evidence that marathoners have risks for major problems like cancer or that sort of thing. So there is a downside to marathoning. I do believe marathoners put a lot of stress on their body, which if they enjoy that, that's fine. I don't enjoy it. I don't do it. And I don't even recommend it as exercise. Now, for many years, we didn't know much about the muscle. Muscles are an important part of your body, of course. You have about 206 of those, and they really do a lot of important things in your body. We did not realize that muscles actually secrete over 200 different substances. And it's like the muscles are telling the rest of your organs, hey, we need you, please get busy and do your job. And grow if you need to grow so you can do the things you need to do. So the muscles actually interact with the rest of your body in many ways and help you to be healthy. Now, the greatest improvement from exercise comes just from being active instead of doing nothing. Now, nobody really does nothing. Everybody gets up and does something. But most people don't get more than about 2,700 steps a day. And the interesting thing is that you can reduce your mortality by 41% if you increase the number of steps to 4,400 steps a day. And that is shown in this graph right here. On the left side of the graph, you'll see the curve starts at about 2,700 steps. And then, as you see, the mortality risk goes down significantly until you get just about 5,000 or 6,000 steps. Then there's not much more decrease. And so you actually see there's real benefit, but it doesn't mean you've got to do 10,000 steps a day to get the benefit. You really don't. 6,000 will get about all you're going to get. Even 4,400, you get a very significant benefit. And if you put on more mileage, well, you're putting on mileage. It is stress on your body, even though it's not as stressful as some things you could be doing. Now, the U.S. has guidelines for recommended exercise. That's about a half an hour a day of vigorous walking for 5 days a week. That would satisfy their recommendation of 150 minutes. Or if you double the amount of vigor in your exercise, then you can do it for half the amount of time. And they also recommend strengthening exercises, and simply not sitting for too long at a time. Research shows that that's not good for you, and it's better to be up and doing some walking a little bit or something every half an hour at least. Um, Unfortunately, the population of the United States is a pampered population which really doesn't have to walk most places and doesn't get the exercise they need, and very few of them satisfy the recommendations, even though those are pretty minimal recommendations. So for men, it's only 26% that satisfy the recommendation. For women, only 19%. We could all be much healthier if we get sufficient exercise. Walking is a great exercise. It's somewhat relaxing, and exercises all your muscles, which is a real benefit, and there's very low risk of injury, and you can start low, 5 to 10 minutes a day if you're not used to it, and build up gradually by adding 5 or 10 minutes to your walking until you get up to the level that you want to be functioning at. All right, but there are things you can do beyond walking, and strength training is one of those important things. And why do I say important? Well, your strength will decrease as you age, and when you reach about 25 to 30 years of age, your strength peaks. And beyond that, you could say you're over the hill. And by the age of 40, you're starting to decline in strength at about 2 to 3% per year. And after age 80, that decline actually accelerates. So you don't want to become weak. This little graph actually doesn't show that rapid decrease after age 80, but it does illustrate the decrease and about the rate at which it happens. And you see there an interesting thing. Men end up at their peak with a lot more strength than women. And so even though they decline at a faster rate, they don't get down to that broken line which runs across the graph nearly as quickly. And that broken line is actually the level at which, if you reduce your strength to that level, you are disabled. You will not be able to do the normal activities of life. You will have problems. So we all want to avoid being disabled. And actually what's true is if you don't do strength training, if you're a woman, you will become disabled at about 15 years earlier than a man who doesn't do anything to prevent disability. So we want to prevent that, so we recommend strength training. And it's interesting, people think that just because they exercise, they don't need strength training. But studies have been done to show that that's not true, and here's one of those studies which involved 59 men and 35 women who were serious runners. You can see they trained weekly at 10 MET hours per week, and 10 MET hours per week is a pretty vigorous training program. And they, during this time, had a stable body mass, so they weren't, really changing a lot about what was going on for 4.8 years. They were followed, and what they observed is their peak leg strength declined at 4.5% per year in spite of their regular running routine. So if they wanted to keep the strength in their legs, which would definitely reduce their risk of falling, they needed to do more than just running. And part of the reason for that is falling is something you can prevent if you're strong enough, but you won't use the same muscles that you use when you're running. I mean, you will use them some, but there are other muscles that come into play and in different ways that just aren't strengthened enough. Now, why do people's muscles lose strength? Well, with age, they actually lose innervation to some of their muscle cells. And when a muscle cell no longer has input from the nerve that should be stimulating it, the muscle simply atrophies and turns into fat or connective tissue. And a slower rate of nerve stimulation also comes upon you as you age. that's not true just of stimulating your muscles, but also anything you do is a little slower as you get older. And why is that important? Well, in order to hold my hand up, I actually have to have nerves firing at a rapid rate. If a nerve simply fired once to a muscle cell, that muscle just will jerk. It will contract in a sort of, uh, a single time. And that is not going to hold my arm up. But as I begin to send stimuli to my muscle a little faster, it'll kind of jerk, jerk, jerk. But then if I send them really fast, it just stays contracted. And that's what helps us hold our position and all of that sort of thing. So it is important to have rapid stimulation of the muscles for maximum strength. And you just can't do that as you age. Your muscles are not stimulated rapidly enough. And the other thing that happens is the protein myosin, and I'm sure other proteins, degrade over time, and the body simply can't make them fast enough to keep them supplied and the muscle supplied with the proteins that are in good shape. They get chemically degraded. Okay, so when we say exercise will help prevent disability, of course you have to do it faithfully. And there are estimates which suggest that if you exercise faithfully at age 80, you will have the strength of a person at age 60 who doesn't exercise faithfully. So you can, in essence, take 20 years off your life, and be essentially 20 years younger in terms of strength. I can't guarantee that everything about you will be 20 years younger. You might still look old, but you will definitely have more strength. The bad news is that your strength, even though you are stronger, will still decline at about the same rate. Okay, let's talk a little about strength training and how to do it. And I learned from one of my mentors, Jim Burns, that there's a real advantage in doing your strength training with free weights. And for me, that's dumbbells. So I have sets of dumbbells of different weights. And the advantage of that is you use a dumbbell in one arm, and you have to be strong enough for the weight of that dumbbell to be able to manage it. If it's too heavy, you won't be able to hold it up or do things with it. And so it prevents you from trying to use too much weight. And with that amount of weight, you won't injure your joints. So that was his philosophy, and I think it's a good philosophy. And then the other thing I have observed, and it's true, people have observed it besides me, and that is if you eat carbohydrates the meal before you work out, you will definitely be able to do those exercises easier, and you will learn to tell the difference if you don't have carbohydrates in the meal before you do your weightlifting. The next thing is how many reps, how many repeats of an exercise. So when I am using a dumbbell in my right hand to train my biceps muscle, I will do at least a dozen repeats of that exercise. And as I do it, it gets harder because I'm using up the energy in my cells, and they can't replace the energy fast enough. So as I'm doing those repeats, it's getting harder and harder. So you want to do a weight which allows you to do somewhere between 8 and 10 reps, and then you're pretty well worn out of that muscle. So that's how to choose it. But as you get older, your joints are more fragile. And one thing that's been shown by studies is that if you make 15 reps and do a little lighter weight, you preserve your strength just about as well as if you do 8 to 10 with a heavier weight. So I use the 15 rep method. And then the final thing is how many times do you want to do those 15 reps of that muscle? And interesting study has shown that in fact if you are lifting a heavy weight and doing somewhere between 8 and 12 repeats, and I think it's true for even up to 15. If you do that once, you will preserve your strength. And people who do 2, 3, 4, 5 reps or sets of the exercises really don't improve their strength. You would think they would just be stronger because they did more sets, which is more of that motion, but what's been shown is they're not any stronger, they just have bigger muscles. And what I think that means is they have more muscles because as the muscle cells get tired, there is a stimulus to produce more muscle cells and to increase the size of the muscle cells. But your brain can only provide so much stimulation. And so even though you get bigger muscles, you can't produce more strength. All right. And to me, I think that's a real advantage. I don't spend a long time in my exercises. I will spend about 10 minutes doing my weightlifting for different muscle groups, and I'm done. I have not wasted my time. Now, beyond strength training, there's something else, and that's something called aerobic fitness. Now, we saw that as you might increase the number of steps you walk a day, there comes a point fairly quickly that you don't really improve your mortality risk. You will not necessarily live longer just because you walked further. But for fitness, that's not true. Aerobic fitness is really defined as how much oxygen can you burn per minute by exercising hard. And if you increase that, you actually decrease the risk of dying, and that goes all the way as far as you can do it. So this nice little graph here shows you on the left side somebody who doesn't do anything to try to improve his aerobic fitness, and he has a risk of 1, let's say. And then if you are below average in somebody who's trying to improve your aerobic fitness, you decrease your risk of dying by 50%. And if you are average, it's even lower. And if you are really quite fit aerobically so that you can burn a lot of oxygen, that's the high level on the right side of that graph, then you are even at lower risk of dying. And if you're an elite athlete and have made a life work out of becoming aerobically fit, like you're a boxer or a basketball player, you have to really be fit, or a football player, then you have even lower risk of dying. So it goes all the way as far as you can go in terms of improving aerobic fitness. You will decrease your risk of dying. And that's quite an interesting thing. So one of the things you could do is spend all your time trying to improve your fitness, but that has, decreasing returns, and you would be wasting time at some point because you just cannot improve it. But fitness has proved to be an extremely useful risk factor in terms of predicting disease risk, and even tells you your risk of dying. And if you know your fitness, then knowing your weight doesn't really tell you anything more about your risk of dying. So fitness is the real key. And fitness lowers the risk. If you are fit, you lower the risk of having a chronic disease, and you lower the risk of dying if you do have one. So how can we improve our maximal exercise capacity? Well, as I mentioned, genetics really prevents you from going beyond a certain level, and people have different potential in that regard, but there are definitely things you can do, and it has become quite popular, certain exercise routines, and one of those is called sprint interval training, SIT. And sprint interval training means that you exercise for about 30 seconds as hard as you can go. That could be running, sprinting, and then you stop and walk for a couple of minutes, whatever, and then you sprint again, and you do that repeatedly for 5 or 6 times at least, and that's sprint interval training. And that's extremely vigorous exercise, and people say it's hard to do. Then there's HIIT, high intensity interval training, which is a little easier to do because it doesn't require you to do maximal effort, but it does about the same thing in terms of 30 seconds of running at a moderate pace perhaps, and then walking and repeating that 5 or 6 times. So it's less strenuous, a little easier to get people to stick with it, and provides a lot of benefit. Well, studies have shown that SIT actually burns fat faster than HIIT, but I don't think that's the way to lose weight. It's a pretty strenuous thing to do, and just not eating as many calories is much easier to do. But the last thing on the list, REHIIT, is something that has been studied and championed by a scientist named Villard in France, and it's a very interesting approach, and the reason it's interesting is because it is less difficult to do. And what it involves here, on the left side of that picture you see on the top of that graph, is SIT, maximal effort, for 5 or 6 times. On the right is REHIIT, and REHIIT means reduced exertion high intensity training. And you do the same thing as you do in SIT, but you just only do it twice. So in REHIIT you do 3 minutes of warm-up, you do 20 seconds going as hard as you can go, and then you do 3 minutes of resting, which could just be cooling down, and then you do another 20 seconds as hard as you can go, and then you do another 3 minutes of cooling down. And people find that quite a bit easier to do, and it only takes 10 minutes to do it. And I love the fact that it only takes 10 minutes, and I can stand doing that exercise. And Bonnie and I are both doing it. We've been doing it for more than a year. We really find it quite good. I have found that I've strengthened my legs noticeably by doing that. I don't use weightlifting for my legs, but I do that, and I really find that I'm stronger than I used to be. And think of it this way, that 20 seconds when you are all out exercising as hard as you can, that is equivalent to running a 200-meter race. And then you get to walk for 3 minutes, and then you do another 200-meter race. Well, what they've shown is that in the first 200-meter race, when you get done with that race, you have burned all the glycogen in your muscles. And so the muscles have to try to recoup some glycogen and get ready for the next run. And on the next run, you don't have much glycogen in your muscles. And so you lose that glycogen quickly, and you're running on fumes. You're going as hard as you can go, and it's producing as much energy as it can. And of course, you're producing a lot of lactic acid, but you're also stressing the aerobic system very hard at the same time, and it's a maximal stimulus for your muscles to improve and to make more mitochondria and be able to burn oxygen faster. And so it's going to improve your aerobic fitness at the same time it's going to strengthen you. And the interesting thing is they have actually studied it, and you do not get any more benefit by doing SIT than you get from doing REHIIT. So why do 6 times when you get all the benefit you're going to get from doing 2 times maximal all out 20 seconds? Okay, so interesting thing is that a study was done to compare REHIT 3 times a week with moderate level exercise 30 minutes a day for 5 times a week to see how they compared. And REHIT actually increased your maximal ability to burn oxygen by 7%, whereas the walking only increased it by 1%. And the REHIT decreased the blood pressure by 4%. That's a real benefit to your health. And it decreased serum fructosamine, which actually is a chemical that begins to build up if you're diabetic or tending towards diabetes. And so you really benefited in decreasing that level. So there's a lot of health benefits to this. Now I want to go back there and just talk one more thing about that, and that is it's strenuous. I don't recommend somebody to just do that if they're not used to doing strenuous exercise. If you're not used to doing strenuous exercise and you want to take up doing REHIT, then you want to see your doctor, you want to get a stress test, you want to be sure your heart is in shape to take that kind of stress. And if it is, I highly recommend it. You might want to build up in some way, but I will say you can do it, and it will provide benefit. And now you can do it on a treadmill. I find that not to my liking. We actually have an elliptical exerciser. We use that. I just set it at the highest setting it'll go to, and I just go flat out as hard as I can go with that. And in 10 minutes, I can burn about 100 calories just doing the REHIT routine. And that's a good exercise 3 times a week. The other 3 times a week that I do weightlifting, and then one time I just get on the elliptical and do 10 minutes without stressing myself too much. I try to burn 100 calories, but I don't try to go all out. Finally, there is something called core muscle training. You may have heard about the plank exercise. That's a good exercise. I don't have anything bad to say about it, except that you might end up doing it for a long time in order to get enough exercise. People can get so they can do that for hours. In fact, the world record is over 10 hours in a single plank. And that's pretty impressive, I must say. But I don't have 10 hours to spend. Of course, I wouldn't be able to do it that long. But I don't recommend that exercise, though I don't have a problem if you do it. More power to you. Instead, I do this exercise, though I don't look like that gentleman. And that is you do what's called a bicycle exercise. You lie on your back on a rug or something convenient, and you put your hands, you don't clasp your fingers behind your head because you don't want to strain your neck by pulling too hard. You just put your hands on the side of your head, on both sides of your head. Don't get your fingers locked together. You might strain your neck and have neck pain. But you just hold your hands to the side of your head and you touch one elbow to the opposite knee, and then you do it the other way, and you repeat that. And I repeat it 30 times in one session, and by the time I get done, my muscles in my abdomen are burning a little. And it's been shown that that exercise increases the activation of the core muscles by 148% higher than the old abdominal crunch that people used to think was good. So this exercise is much better for your core muscles, and I recommend it. Now, exercise has real benefit. I do believe that. Now, if you read your Bible, you might find this text that Paul wrote to Timothy. It says, "For bodily exercise profits a little, but godliness is profitable for all things, having promise of the life that now is and of that which is to come." Now, we have to understand that Paul lived in a day when people got lots more exercise walking and working. Now we have a lot of machinery which does most of the heavy lifting or heavy exercise. We don't have to do that, and we don't walk much because we have cars. And so exercise is a little more profitable than it was in Paul's day, though he is making a good point, and I don't really want to waste my time. I just want to get the health benefits from exercise. and then I have time for the more important things in life. Now, we've talked the last 2 times we met about reading labels, and I want to have one more session of reading labels because I think it is very important in terms of changing your disease risk. And we talked about calories per gram for a serving of food, which you can read on the label, and it's really healthy if calories per gram is less than 1. It's even very good if it's up to 1.5. And fiber on the package, if that's greater in grams than the total carbohydrates in grams divided by 10, then that's a very healthy source of fiber. And your grain products should be sources of fiber. Not everything you eat has to be a source of fiber, but your grain products definitely should be a source of fiber. And as far as fruits and vegetables are concerned, I don't think there's any one of them hardly that doesn't satisfy that. All right, and then sodium per serving, you can read it on the label. Ideally, less than 140 milligrams of sodium per serving, and you're going to be on a low sodium diet. And if you're not used to it, it's really good for you. And if you do it, you'll get used to it. Things will not taste flat just because you're using less sodium. And I'm not saying zero sodium. You don't have to be zero sodium. But less sodium, it helps lower your blood pressure. All right, let's just look at a few labels here. This happens to be a Pepperidge Farm bread. It's a multigrain, whole grain bread. It's pretty healthy, actually. Now, in spite of the fact that we just talked about calories per gram, bread never satisfies that criterion of less than 1. Here you see 130 calories and almost 50 grams for a slice. So it's more like 2.5. And we just know that ratio is not going to be good for bread, so we're not going to talk about it anymore, other than just to say that we know that's true. That just tells us we can't eat all the bread we want. We know that we have to limit the bread we eat. But we can look at the sodium, and there you see 130 milligrams of sodium per slice of bread, and a slice of bread a serving. That's a healthy amount of sodium, so that's very good. And then the other thing to look at is the fiber, and you look at the total carbohydrates there, 22 grams. You divide by 10, you get 2.2, and that's less than the 3 grams of fiber, so it's healthy in regard to fiber. And you also notice there's an amount of sugar that's added, 3 grams. That's pretty healthy also. That's not a lot of sugar. So that's very healthy bread. Now here is the same company, and they make what they call hearty white bread. Well, hearty if you want to call it that, but I don't consider it hearty. Anyway, what you see is that it has about the same calories per gram, but we want to look at the sodium, and we see the sodium is pretty high, 230 milligrams per slice. That's not ideal if you are worried about your blood pressure or just want to keep your blood pressure low. So we don't like that. And then we look at the fiber, and we don't like the fiber either. That's 1 gram of fiber, and that's less than 26 divided by 10, or 2.6. So that's not healthy in regard to fiber. That's not healthy in regard to sodium. We should avoid it. We should eat the healthy bread. And now here's something called Dave's bread, which is actually interesting bread, and I really enjoyed eating it. However, I will tell you, it's not completely healthy. It has 170 milligrams of sodium, a little higher than we would like. It has good fiber, 5 grams, definitely bigger than 2.2 grams of the carbs divided by 10. So it's good for fiber. It's not too bad for sodium, but it has a lot of sugar in it. It has 5 grams of sugar. That's a teaspoon of sugar added for each slice of bread. And I would prefer not to do that. So don't recommend it for that reason, though it does have a lot of good things in it, even has a lot of seeds added. Now here's potato bread. These are potato rolls, and they come in about like the white bread. They don't have a lot of fiber. So 1 gram of fiber compared with 2.3 isn't going to cut it. And there we see the sodium is a little high, not terrible maybe, but a little higher than we'd like. So that's not a really good product if you're looking to be healthy. And here's something called artisan bread, and it would make you think it was healthy, but it's actually white. It's white bread, and in fact, it has low fiber, just like the potato rolls and the white bread we already saw. But its problem, it has got 290 milligrams of sodium, so that's really a step worse than the breads we've already looked at. Well, I had to throw in these wonderful mint cream Oreos just so we could get a look at those. Well, actually, they're good for sodium. Of course, they don't have any fiber, virtually, so they're really bad on the fiber scale. And the other problem is they really got a lot of sugar. 13 grams of sugar for a serving has about 26 grams of sugar added, and that's over 5 tablespoons or teaspoons of sugar. That's a lot. All right, a couple more things. It's good to look at soup. This is one thing you really ought to look at before you buy it. This is celery soup, and of course it's good on the calories per gram. That's not a problem because it's soup. Almost all soups are good in that regard. But look at the sodium, 850 milligrams of sodium for a serving of this soup. You're really getting a dose of sodium, and you don't really want that much sodium. Now, it's not great on fiber, but you probably don't eat soup for the fiber. So we won't worry so much about the fiber. Now, here's a healthier soup. This is a healthier soup, and it's advertised as a healthy soup. Of course, the calories per gram are good. The sodium is 410. That doesn't look really wonderful, but if you look at the potassium down at the bottom of the can, of the label there's 650 milligrams of potassium. That pretty much takes care of the sodium. So you can actually eat that with a clear conscience if you're worried about sodium. And again, the fiber's really not great. Now, lastly, I just wanted to mention a couple of studies which we have not talked about, but they're really interesting for two reasons. And the first reason is that they talk about a healthy diet. And the second reason is they say that people actually enjoy a healthy diet. And so this study was done way back in 1983. That's a long time ago. That's 38 years ago, roughly. And they took 20 people, and they put them either on a low energy density diet or a high energy density diet for 5 days, and they looked at what happened to people. They found that regardless of how much the people weighed, they found these diets equally satisfying. The people who ate the high energy diet ate twice as many calories as those who ate the low energy diet, and they didn't try to restrict calories, by the way. They were told they could eat whatever they wanted. And people who ate the diets, the two different diets, were equally happy with them, but the results were drastically different. And the people who ate the healthier diet, it took them longer to eat it because it actually takes a bit longer to chew food that has fiber in it. And healthy food has fiber in it, by and large. And here's a study done just a couple of years ago at NIH. They took 20 patients again. They put them in a ward where they could watch carefully what they ate and record it. And they did a little longer study for 14 days. They wanted to see what happened to the people's weight as they ate the two different diets. They worked the diets out so that there were the same amount of calories in the food that was offered to the people, and the sugar content was the same, the fat, the fiber, and the micronutrients. However, those who ate the high energy diet had to get their fiber by putting something like Metamucil in water and drinking it, because there wasn't the fiber in the food, because these foods were what are called ultra processed, and when you eat ultra processed food, the fiber's been removed. And how do you know when food is ultra processed? That's when it takes a long time to read the label or the ingredients, because there's so many different ingredients, and it takes a dictionary to try to figure out what all those things are. If you have that problem, you have ultra processed food. And that's opposed to unprocessed food, like the things you might pick out in your garden or in your orchard. And there's very little processing. There may be cooking. There may be adding a few ingredients that are pretty pure themselves, like herbs or salt, that sort of thing. And so what they found is that people were allowed to again eat all they wanted. Those who ate the ultra-processed food ate 500 more calories per day than those who ate the unprocessed food. But they found there was no difference in their perceived pleasantness of the foods. And again, those who ate the ultra-processed diet were eating it faster. And that's because they didn't really have to chew much. They could get it down in a hurry. All right. Just one more time, I want to emphasize that if you're making changes, you want to work with your doctor, especially if you're on medication. And it's good to keep him up to date on what you're doing and discuss your goals with him. And most doctors are going to want to help you in living a healthier lifestyle. All right, we do appreciate your coming, and